Microsoft and Amazon are among the wealthiest companies in the world, each with a market capitalization of well over $2 trillion. But a bill out of Washington could trim off some of that cash to save the state's finances. Here with more on this is the Center Square's Washington reporter, Tim Clouser. Tim, what would this bill do?
Yeah, so tech companies that operate in and out of Washington state with a worldwide revenue over $25 billion pay an extra surcharge on top of other taxes that they fee. A lot of businesses in Washington pay what's called a B&O tax or a business and occupation tax. But those tech firms that make all that money, they're required to pay an advanced computing surcharge on top of that. That's 1.22%. Now, that could be a lot of money, but it's capped at $9 million annually. So really, when you have companies that are have a market cap of over $2 trillion, I mean, that's state could be getting more money, but the question is at what cost? So by removing this cap, they're setting themselves up to make a bunch of more money, assuming that these companies continue to operate out of Washington state.
And what are they hoping to use this increase in revenue for?
Yeah, they want to use the revenue for workforce education. That's what the bill says. It says that this revenue, and that's where the existing revenue already goes, what they're making from that $9 million cap. Now, nothing would change in terms of where the revenue went. It's just in terms of how much revenue they're generating. But they said this revenue, specifically the extra revenue, is needed due to the state's growing workforce. Over the coming years, the state's job growth is anticipated to go up 12.8%. Now, I believe the national average is at 2.8% right now. So we're far above that, and we're falling behind in terms of credentialed workers as well. So they want to use this money to expand the state's college grant program, teacher trainings, and incentivize students to stay in state when they attend college. Now, there's also the fact that the state is grappling with a budget deficit. That's billions and billions of dollars now. Sorry, that's not a deficit, it's a shortfall. So they haven't spent the money yet, but they're planning to spend that money over the next 4 years. Now, they could cut spending, but it's at the expense of a lot of programs, such as this workforce education account that this thing funds. So really, they have a question of, do they want to cut it, or do they want to raise taxes to be able to pay for it, which is what this bill is essentially intending to do.
What problems could arise if they do raise taxes on these big companies?
Well, there's always the question is if these companies will continue operating in and out of Washington state. Now, it's probably safe to say that Amazon and Microsoft, these giant tech companies, are going to stay in Washington. They can afford this, but the question is there. I mean, Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos himself lived in Washington and moved to Florida after the state passed a capital gains tax. Now, just in the last year, he's avoided over $1 billion in taxes. Now, we're talking about a $9 million cap on a giant corporation. He avoided $1 billion in taxes alone. So that kind of just frames it to show how much revenue this could bring in. Now, that concern remains. I think that's a concern with a lot of businesses right now. But there's just also the question is if the workforce education account is worth it. Now, a lot of students testified and said, look, this is something we need and we rely on to get through schools. But others that were in opposition to the bill said, look, test scores are still falling. We're investing more money, but things are staying stagnant in terms of credential workers coming out. So they just don't see it as worth it.
Yeah, you mentioned kind of some of the arguments that were made on both sides. Were there any other arguments raised in this hearing?
No, it was pretty brief in that regard. This hearing had a lot of tax bills piled onto each other. So one thing that Representative Cindy Jacobson out of Puyallup said was, look, this bill and others remind me of the song Taxman by the Beatles. Now, back way before our time, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones both left the United Kingdom because they thought the taxes were too high there. And they moved. Now, she said she has the same concerns with this bill and all the others that are getting pushed through the legislature to save the state's finances. They don't want to raise taxes to save themselves at the expense of all these people leaving the state, and in a sense, making their financial situation even worse.
Well, Tim, thank you for your insights on this story. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.